She stood still, veiled in silk the color of dried blood, her face hidden from the gods, and from herself. In the candle-lit temple, as drums echoed like distant thunder, the air choked with incense and dread. Arsinoe's hands trembled, though she dared not show it. The high priest's voice rose in a chant no one dared interrupt. Her father stood beside her, not in the robes of a protector, but in the regalia of a groom. And the girl who once called him Papa now stood as his bride. The gods sanctify this union. A priest declared, but no god had ever watched this closely. The gold ring he slid onto her finger was heavy, twisted in the shape of two serpents devouring each other. In myth, it symbolized divine union. In truth, it marked her captivity. She was 15. He was nearly 60. To the people outside the palace, it was a holy act royalty ascending to immortality through bloodline purity. To Arsinoe, it was the night something inside her died, the final breath of a childhood already bruised by control, fear, and silence. She remembered that moment with haunting clarity, her mother's absence. The locked doors, the taste of the ceremonial wine, the way his hand lingered on her back after the vow, the way her body froze when his lips met hers, not with a father's affection, but with a husband's possession. "You are my Isis," he had whispered in her ear, breath hot against her skin, "and I, your Osiris. This is the will of the gods." But she wasn't a goddess. She was a girl trapped in a dynasty where family meant flesh, and the crown meant control. The Ptolemies were not a family, they were a machine, a dynasty that devoured its own to stay alive, and Arsinoe had just been swallowed whole. That night, she lay beneath golden sheets, the marble walls around her whispering prayers she could no longer believe in. Somewhere outside, the Nile kept flowing, eternal and indifferent. History would call her queen, a warrior, a goddess, but none of those titles would ever erase the first one burned into her soul, daughter. Bride, victim, and in the silence of Egypt's most sacred chamber, no one heard her scream. Egypt in the 3rd century before Christ was not the land of pharaohs it had once been. The sand still whispered of Ramses and the pyramids still kissed the sun, but power now wore a different face, Greek, foreign, and cunning. The Ptolemaic dynasty had risen from the ashes of Alexander the Great's empire, carved out by one of his most ruthless generals, Ptolemy Isoter. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his empire, vast, magnificent, and unstable, was torn apart by his successors. Egypt fell into Ptolemy's hands like a jewel, and he held it tightly, not as a steward, but as a king. He founded a dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries, and would become infamous for its incestuous bloodlines, whispered assassinations, and masks of godhood. They claimed divinity not through virtue, but through blood-shared blood. To them, incest wasn't taboo, it was divine preservation. A ritual, they argued, that imitated the gods. Isis and Osiris, siblings and lovers, had become the blueprint for royal unions. If gods could marry within their blood, why not kings? But what began as propaganda became a tradition. Fathers married daughters, brothers married sisters. Queens ruled beside men they once played with in the nursery. And beneath all the gold and marble, behind the statues and ceremony, girls were offered like lambs, made sacred by silence. Arsinoe Roman, too, was born into this theater of power and myth around 316 BC, the daughter of Ptolemy I and Queen Berenice. From the moment she could walk, she was taught not to live, but to appear, every movement rehearsed. Every word weighed. A girl raised in the palace was never truly a child. She was a pawn with lipstick and lineage, and she was smart, perhaps too smart. Even as a young girl, she could recite the histories of Egypt, outwit tutors, and charm foreign dignitaries. Her beauty made her visible. Her brilliance made her dangerous. Her father noticed, and in a dynasty where men feared the brilliance of their sons, they feared the defiance of their daughters even more. So, Ptolemy did what his dynasty taught him to do. He took control of what he could not understand, and in a palace built by conquerors, Arsinoe became the sacrifice that kept the illusion alive. The corridors of the royal palace grew colder as Arsinoe aged. Every smile from her father carried a shadow. Every gesture lingered too long. Servants learned to lower their eyes when she passed, as if to pretend they didn't notice the subtle, sick shift in the way King Ptolemy watched his own daughter. Then came the night of the eclipse. The sky turned red over Alexandria, and the priests called it an omen, a sign of divine union approaching. That morning, Arsinoe was summoned to the temple of Isis. She thought it would be another ritual, another public display of obedience. But when she arrived, the doors closed behind her and no guards were posted. Only her father waited, robed in white, a crown of lotus and gold on his aging head. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. She knew. "The gods have spoken, my daughter. The Nile flows with sacred blood. Isis and Osiris must live again, through us." Her heart stopped. It was no longer a threat wrapped in myth. It was real. There, in the silent temple, surrounded by the flickering eyes of painted deities, her father proposed what no father should, not with cruelty, not with force, but with a twisted sense of righteousness, as if the gods themselves demanded it. That week, the kingdom was flooded with proclamations. The Princess Arsinoe would marry the pharaoh, most celebrated. The Ptolemaic court praised the wisdom of divine marriage. Statues were erected, depicting Arsinoe and her father entwined like celestial lovers. No one questioned it. No one spoke for her. Her mother had already died under mysterious circumstances the year before. Some say she wept herself to death. Others say her silence was enforced with poison. Alone, Arsinoe entered the temple of union, flanked by priests, and robed in a gown woven with gold thread and sacred symbols. Her face was blank like stone. The rituals lasted 3 days, echoing the myth of Osiris's dismemberment and Isis's reassembly of his body, a grotesque justification for a monstrous act. And on the final night, beneath the statue of the goddess she was forced to embody, Arsinoe became both bride and property. "You are reborn," the priests declared, but in her heart something else had awakened. Not love, not surrender, revenge. They thought she had accepted it, that her silence meant consent, that the gold on her fingers and the smile on her painted lips had erased the girl she once was. But beneath the layers of ritual and silk, Arsinoe was still alive, burning with fury, trapped inside a role she never chose. She played her part well. She walked beside Ptolemy in processions, blessed the people, kissed the statues, and dined at his side while nobles praised their sacred love. But behind her eyes, something calculating took shape. She began to study the court not as a child, not as a wife, but as a strategist. She watched the generals who looked too long at her. She counted the servants loyal to the queen who no longer lived. She paid attention to the physicians, to the cupbearers, to the men who feared her father in public but whispered doubts in private. Then came the fever. One night, Ptolemy fell ill after a feast, a slow illness, creeping and strange. His skin yellowed. His eyes turned glassy. Physicians were baffled, but Arsinoe never left his side. She held his hand as he weakened. She sang to him softly, the same lullabies his mother might have used. And when he begged for her forgiveness in his final hours, she leaned in close. "The gods have forgiven you," she whispered. "Now go meet them." The cause of death was recorded as divine expiration, a common phrase used when no one dared speak the truth. But some say it was a rare poison, one that mimicked illness, delivered slowly over weeks. Perhaps in his wine, perhaps in his ointments, perhaps from his daughter's own hands. Arsinoe wore white at his funeral, the color of rebirth, not mourning. She stood tall as the priests recited blessings, her face unreadable. The people cheered her dignity, the court praised her strength, and in the silence of the burial chamber, she watched the last stone seal his tomb. He had taken everything from her, her childhood, her innocence, her name, but he had underestimated her mind. Now she was free, free to rule, free to shape the world he had twisted, but freedom came with a price. And though the king was dead, the scars he left behind still bled beneath her crown.